I wasn't fired because I was incompetent. I was fired because I knew too much. They thought they could toss me out with a cracked coffee mug and spare change disguised as severance. Their mistake wasn't terminating me. Their mistake was forgetting that I always leave a paper trail. And this time, that trail would burn their entire corporation to the ground. They wanted me gone? Fine. But they should have made sure I couldn't reach the matches from outside their glass tower. My name is Sophia Grant. And after 10 years of bleeding myself dry for Nexacore Systems, I was reduced to a PowerPoint slide. The conference room smelled like overpriced cologne and cowardice. 3 executives sat across from me, their faces arranged in what I'm sure they practiced as empathetic concern in the mirror that morning. The head of HR, a woman whose smile never reached her eyes, clicked through slides with manicured nails that probably cost more than my hourly rate. As you can see, Sophia, we're entering a phase of cultural restructuring, she said, her voice dripping with corporate honey. We need to realign our growth vision to better synergize with market dynamics. Cultural restructuring, growth vision, synergize. I'd written enough reports to know these words were just expensive wrapping paper around a pink slip. They'd weaponized the English language into a cushion for their conscience. What this means, she continued, clicking to a slide titled Transition Opportunities, is that we're optimizing our human capital allocation. I almost laughed. Optimizing human capital allocation. That's what they called throwing me out after a decade of 70-hour weeks, missed birthdays, and saving their asses from regulatory disasters they didn't even know existed. The CFO, a man who once told me that compliance was just bureaucratic theater, leaned forward with rehearsed sincerity. This isn't a reflection of your performance, Sophia. It's simply a strategic pivot in our organizational architecture. Strategic pivot. Organizational architecture. I wondered if they had a random generator for this bullshit or if someone actually got paid to string these words together. Your severance package is generous. HR continued, sliding a folder across the table. 2 weeks' pay, continued health coverage for 30 days, and of course, we'll provide a positive reference. 2 weeks. 10 years. Compressed into 2 weeks. I opened the folder and saw the number. It was less than what they spent on their quarterly team-building retreat to Napa Valley. The same retreat where they decided I was expendable, probably between wine tastings. We'll need your badge, company laptop, and phone before you leave today, she added, her empathetic mask slipping just enough to reveal the administrator beneath. Security will escort you to collect your personal items. You have 15 minutes. 15 minutes to pack up a decade. They'd calculated it down to the minute, just like everything else in this sterile hellscape of glass and metrics. Do you have any questions? The third executive finally spoke, the VP of Operations who'd once called my risk assessments paranoid fiction. I had plenty of questions, like how they could look at themselves in the mirror, like whether they realized I documented every ignored warning, every dismissed concern, every regulation they'd laughed off as unnecessary friction. But I just smiled, the same hollow smile I'd perfected in countless meetings. No questions, I said, standing up. Your message is crystal clear. The security guard was already waiting outside, a young guy who looked embarrassed to be there. As we walked through the open office, that architectural nightmare designed to eliminate privacy and maximize surveillance, I felt the studied avoidance of my former colleagues. Eyes glued to screens, suddenly fascinated by spreadsheets they'd been ignoring all morning. 10 years of collaboration evaporating into uncomfortable silence. Someone had already put a cardboard box on my desk. Thoughtful. I loaded it with the detritus of corporate dedication, a plant that had somehow survived the fluorescent lights, a coffee mug with a motivational quote I'd always hated, photographs from company events where everyone pretended to have fun. But the real treasure was in my desk drawer. A leather notebook filled with handwritten notes from every meeting, every decision, every moment when they'd chosen profit over protocol. They could take my badge, but they couldn't take my memory. And they certainly couldn't take the copies I'd been emailing to my personal account for years, following every company policy about maintaining proper documentation. As the elevator descended, the security guard shifted uncomfortably. I'm sorry about this, he mumbled, Don't be, I said, adjusting the box in my arms. They just made the best decision of my life. They just don't know it yet. The lobby's marble floors echoed with the sound of my heels, designer shoes I'd bought to fit in, to look the part, to play their game. Outside, the city hummed with its usual chaos, indifferent to my small catastrophe. But as I stood there, holding a cardboard box that supposedly contained my worth, I felt something I hadn't expected. Freedom. Not the desperate freedom of having nothing left to lose, but the dangerous freedom of knowing exactly what cards I still held. They thought they'd ended the game by flipping the table. They forgot I'd been counting cards all along. The cardboard box sat on my kitchen counter like a coffin for my corporate identity. I poured myself a glass of wine, the good stuff I'd been saving for a special occasion, though I'd never imagined this would be it. One by one, I pulled out the artifacts of my terminated existence. The motivational mug. Excellence is not a skill, it's an attitude. I'd bought it my first week, back when I still believed in their mission statements. Now it seemed like a prophecy. My excellence had been an attitude problem they needed to eliminate. The framed photo from the 2019 Innovation Summit, where I'd presented the compliance framework that saved them from a 7-figure fine. Everyone smiling, arms around shoulders. Marcus Bell front and center with his practiced CEO-adjacent grin. Marcus, the vice president of operations, who'd once pulled me aside after a risk assessment presentation to say, "Sophia, you need to understand, compliance is just paper threats. Nobody actually enforces this stuff. You're creating friction where we need velocity." Velocity. That was his favorite word. Move fast, break things, ask forgiveness, not permission. Except when things broke, it was never Marcus asking for forgiveness. It was always someone like me, cleaning up the debris while he collected another performance bonus. I opened my leather notebook, its pages dense with my careful handwriting. Every meeting, every decision, every moment when they'd chosen to ignore my warnings. Here was the meeting where Marcus dismissed the new SEC regulations about third-party service chains. "We're too small to be on their radar. Stop being such a hall monitor, Sophia." Hall monitor. That's what he'd reduced 10 years of protecting their asses to, hall monitor. Another page, another ignored warning. The vendor relationships that didn't meet regulatory standards. The data handling practices that walked a razor's edge of legality. The financial reporting shortcuts that would make an auditor's eye twitch. All documented in my precise handwriting, all dated, all with names attached. They'd been so confident in their untouchability, so certain that rules were for other companies, bigger companies, companies that actually mattered to regulators. They'd built their empire on the assumption that nobody was watching. But I had been watching. And more importantly, I'd been writing it all down. My phone buzzed. A LinkedIn notification. 3 former colleagues had viewed my profile. Word traveled fast in our incestuous little industry. By tomorrow, everyone would know. Sophia Grant, 10-year veteran, shown the door in a cultural restructuring. The polite fiction would spread through networking events and coffee meetings. Oh, you know how it is. Sometimes the fit just isn't right anymore. The fit? As if I were a shirt that had shrunk in the wash instead of a person who'd mortgaged a decade of her life for a company that discarded people like obsolete software. I pulled out the risk assessment binder, my masterpiece of ignored warnings. Page after page of detailed analysis. Potential fines. Regulatory violations waiting to happen. Each one stamped with "reviewed" and Marcus's initials. His signature dismissal of everything I'd tried to protect them from. The irony was perfect. They'd fired me to cut costs, to optimize human capital allocation. But I'd been the finger in the dam, holding back a flood of regulatory consequences they didn't even know was building. Without me there to quietly fix things, to smooth over the rough edges, to make their recklessness look like strategy. Well, that was their problem now. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in tissue paper like something precious, was the anniversary gift they'd given me at 5 years. A crystal paperweight engraved with the company values: integrity, innovation, impact, integrity. I held it up to the light, watching how it fractured the afternoon sun into rainbows on my wall. They'd etched their lies into crystal, made them beautiful and heavy and permanent. But crystal, like trust, was remarkably fragile when dropped from the right height. My laptop sat closed on the table, my personal one, the one they couldn't touch. Inside were years of emails I'd sent to myself, following company policy to the letter. Employees are encouraged to maintain proper documentation of all business-critical decisions. They'd probably meant PowerPoints and spreadsheets. But emails worked too. Emails with attachments. Emails with dates and times and digital fingerprints that court systems found very interesting. I opened my phone and scrolled through my contacts. Lawyers, journalists, former colleagues now working at regulatory agencies. People who'd told me to call if I ever needed anything. People who'd wondered aloud how Nexicor managed to fly so close to the sun without getting burned. But I didn't call anyone. Not yet. Not. Revenge, like compliance, required careful documentation and perfect timing. They taught me that patience was a corporate virtue, that waiting for the right moment was the difference between success and failure. The box sat empty now, its contents spread across my counter like evidence at a crime scene. Which, in a way, it was. Evidence of a corporate execution, clean and bloodless and wrapped in HR-approved language. I raised my wine glass to the empty box. To cultural restructuring, I said to my empty apartment, and to strategic pivots. Tomorrow. They'd already be forgetting me. Moving on. Redistributing my work among the survivors who'd learned to work even longer hours for the privilege of keeping their badges. But tomorrow, I'd begin my new job. The one they'd unknowingly hired me for when they handed me that cardboard box. The job of showing them exactly what they'd thrown away. 3 days into my unemployment, I found it. Buried in my notebook between a grocery list and meeting notes from last September, the smoking gun I'd forgotten I'd loaded, SEC Rule 15C2-8. Third-party service chain documentation requirements. Effective January 1st, 2024. The rule that would make Nexicor's entire vendor network a liability nightmare. I remembered the meeting perfectly now. Marcus had been eating a $30 salad from that overpriced place downstairs, stabbing at kale while I explained the new regulations. Every third-party vendor needs documented compliance verification. Every data transfer needs an audit trail. Every financial transaction needs... Sophia, he'd interrupted, pointing his fork at me like a weapon. Do you know how much that would cost? We'd need to rebuild our entire vendor management system. Yes, I'd said. About $3 million. He'd actually laughed. $3 million? For paperwork? To satisfy some bureaucrats who probably don't even understand what we do? He'd pushed the regulation printout back across the table, leaving a small oil stain on the corner. File this under nice to have. We're not Google. Nobody's watching us that closely. Nobody's watching us that closely. I could still hear the dismissive confidence in his voice, see the way he'd already mentally moved on to his next meeting before I'd even left his office. But here's what Marcus didn't understand about regulations. They're like spider webs. Invisible until you walk into them. And by then, you're already trapped. I pulled up the SEC website on my laptop, navigating to the enforcement section. There it was, published just 2 weeks ago. Commission announces increased scrutiny of fintech third-party vendor relationships. They were hunting, and they'd just announced the season was open. Nexicor had 47 third-party vendors. I knew because I'd mapped them all out, created a beautiful flowchart showing how data moved through the ecosystem. Marcus had called it unnecessarily complex and filed it away. But those 47 vendors were now 47 potential violations, each carrying a fine of up to $500,000. Do the math. That's $23.5 million in potential fines. For a company whose last quarterly profit was $18 million. I made myself another coffee and opened my personal email. There they were, dozens of messages I'd sent to myself over the years. Documentation for personal records in the subject line. Always sent during business hours, always from my work email. Company policy encouraged maintaining personal copies of important documents. They'd probably meant performance reviews and pay stubs. But policy was policy. Here was the email from January 2nd, my first day back after the holidays. Urgent SEC Rule 15C28. Compliance required, action needed, sent to Marcus, CC'd to the C-suite. Marcus had replied, all. Let's table this for Q2 when we have more bandwidth. Table it for Q2. We were now in Q4, and that table had never been revisited. Another email from March. Vendor compliance update. Critical gaps identified. I'd attached a spreadsheet listing every non-compliant vendor, every missing document, every audit trail that led nowhere. Marcus's response, this feels like we're overthinking it. Let's focus on revenue-generating activities. Revenue-generating activities, not revenue-protecting activities, not company-protecting activities, just generation. Like money was electricity you could summon from the ether without consequence. I found the crown jewel in an email from June. Marcus had actually written it down. The fatal flaw of every executive who thinks they're untouchable. Sophia, I need you to stop raising this vendor compliance issue. It's creating unnecessary anxiety among the board. We've operated successfully for 8 years without this level of documentation. We're not changing course because of some new rule that probably won't even be enforced. Consider this your final word on the matter. Your final word. How prophetic. The thing about regulatory time bombs is that they tick very quietly until they don't. And Nexicor had installed dozens of them, each one carefully documented in my warnings, each one dismissed with the casual arrogance of men who'd never faced consequences. I closed my laptop and walked to my window. 23 floors below. The city churned through its Tuesday afternoon routine. Somewhere in one of those glass towers, Marcus was probably in another meeting, eating another overpriced salad, dismissing another warning from someone trying to protect his company from himself. But the spider web was already there, invisible and waiting. All it needed was the right vibration to alert the spider that prey had arrived. I picked up my notebook again, running my finger along the spine. 10 years of careful documentation, of being the hall monitor. The friction in their velocity. They'd removed the friction, all right. Removed it just in time to hit the wall at full speed. The question wasn't whether to pull the trigger. The question was when and how. And whether to watch from close range or from a safe distance as the explosion lit up the financial district. Marcus had been wrong about one thing. Somebody was watching. The SEC, the Justice Department, the financial press. They were all watching, waiting for someone to point them in the right direction. Waiting for someone with inside knowledge and outside motivation. Waiting for someone exactly like me. I opened a new document on my laptop and began typing. Observations on third-party vendor compliance in the fintech sector. Academic, theoretical, no company names. Just observations that any concerned citizen might make after careful study of public regulations and industry practices. The kind of observations that might prompt certain questions at certain regulatory meetings. The kind of questions that sounded innocent until you realize they were targeted missiles aimed at glass houses. The kind of questions only someone who'd been on the inside would know to ask. The Marriott Conference Center squatted on K Street like a beige monument to mediocrity. The Financial Oversight Committee's public hearing was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the Arlington Room, a name that promised grandeur but delivered fluorescent lights that flickered with the rhythm of a dying moth. I arrived early, choosing a seat in the third row, not too close to seem eager, not too far to be dismissed. I wore my second-best suit, the navy one that said, concerned professional, rather than disgruntled former employee. The coffee they served tasted like disappointment mixed with non-dairy creamer. But I sipped it anyway, needing something to do with my hands. The room filled slowly with the usual suspects. Compliance officers checking phones, reporters looking bored, a few academics with notebooks. And the lobbyists in suits that cost more than my severance. Nobody recognized me. In the corporate ecosystem, individual contributors were invisible once they left the hive. Commissioner Patricia Hawkins opened the session with the standard bureaucratic foreplay. thanking everyone for coming, reviewing the agenda, reminding us about the public comment period. She had the exhausted look of someone who'd sat through 1,000 identical meetings, each one blending into the next like watercolors in rain. We'll now open the floor for public questions regarding the new third-party vendor regulations, she announced, her voice carrying the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. A few hands went up. Softball questions from industry plants, trying to argue for lighter enforcement, longer grace periods, more flexibility in interpretation. The commissioners nodded politely, took notes, gave non-answers that had been lawyer-approved into meaninglessness. 40 minutes in, when the energy had dropped to near comatose levels, I raised my hand. Yes, you in the navy suit, I stood, smoothing my skirt. Thank you. Commissioner Hawkins, I have a question about the intersection of Rule 15C28 and existing vendor relationships in the fintech sector. A few heads turned. This wasn't the usual softball. Specifically, I continued, my voice clear and professionally neutral. If a fintech company has been operating with vendors who handle sensitive financial data but lack the newly required documentation, and if this company has been made aware of these gaps but chosen not to address them, would that constitute willful non-compliance? The room's atmosphere shifted, like the pressure change before a storm. Reporters looked up from their phones. Compliance officers stopped typing. Commissioner Hawkins leaned forward slightly. Could you elaborate on your question? Of course, I said, pulling out a single sheet of paper as if consulting notes. Let's say, hypothetically, a company has 47 third-party vendors. These vendors process everything from payment data to identity verification. The company has been notified internally about compliance gaps, but has decided that the cost of compliance outweighs the risk of enforcement. I paused, letting the number 47 hang in the air like a specific accusation wearing a hypothetical mask. In such a case, I continued, would the SEC consider this a pattern of deliberate negligence? And would the fines be applied per vendor or per violation? Because with 47 vendors and multiple violations per vendor, the mathematical implications are significant. The scratch of pens on paper filled the silence. Someone from the Wall Street Journal was typing furiously. The compliance officers were doing mental math, their faces growing progressively paler. Commissioner Roberts, who'd been half asleep, was now fully alert. That's a very specific hypothetical, Ms. Just a concerned citizen interested in regulatory compliance, I said, not offering my name. But to finish my question, if such a company existed, would the SEC's Enforcement Division prioritize investigating it, especially if someone were to file a formal complaint with detailed documentation? The word documentation landed like a grenade with the pin pulled. Hawkins exchanged glances with her fellow commissioners. We take all credible complaints seriously. The Enforcement Division is particularly interested in patterns of willful noncompliance, especially when companies have been warned internally about regulatory requirements. Thank you, I said, sitting down. That's very clarifying. The meeting continued for another hour, but the energy had changed. Reporters were texting their editors. Compliance officers were quietly making phone calls in the hallway. The hypothetical company with 47 vendors had become the invisible elephant in the room. As the meeting adjourned, I slipped out quickly, avoiding eye contact with the Journal reporter who was clearly trying to follow me. In the parking garage, I sat in my car for a moment, hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Was that you at the hearing? Holy shit, the office is in DEFCON 1. I deleted the message without responding, but I smiled, imagining the scene at Nexicor. Emergency meetings being called, legal teams being assembled. Marcus probably choking on his afternoon kale salad as someone explained that a very specific question had just been asked at a very public hearing. They'd know it was me. The number 47 was too specific, too precise. It was my signature, written in regulatory blood. But knowing and proving were two different things. I'd asked a hypothetical question at a public hearing. Nothing illegal about that, nothing actionable. Just a concerned citizen exercising her civic duty to seek clarification about important financial regulations. The beauty of it was that I'd done exactly what they'd always told me to do, raised my concerns through proper channels. It just happened that the proper channel was now a public forum with reporters present, rather than a closed-door meeting where my warnings could be dismissed with a wave of Marcus's fork. As I drove home, I knew the fuse was lit. The SEC moved slowly, but it moved inevitably. Questions had been asked, records would be requested, audits would be scheduled, and somewhere in a glass tower, 47 vendors were about to become 47 reasons why firing me had been the most expensive decision Nexacor would ever make. The first domino fell at 9:47 a.m. on a Thursday. I was at my local coffee shop, the one with the pretentious latte art and Wi-Fi that actually worked, when my phone buzzed. Anonymous number, encrypted messaging app. I'd been expecting this. Is this SG? This is Jamie from Compliance. Junior analyst. You trained me 2 years ago. I remembered Jamie. Fresh out of college, eager, still believed the corporate mission statement. The kind of true believer who took notes during meetings and actually read the regulations I'd forwarded. I can't confirm or deny who this is, I typed back, but I'm listening. Did you ask that question at the FSC hearing, the one about the 47 vendors? Questions at public hearings are public record, I replied. Anyone could have asked anything. 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before the next message came through. Marcus had a meltdown, threw his coffee mug at the wall. The $300 one from that boutique in Soho. Legal is here, external counsel. They're pulling every email, every document. Someone from the SEC called asking for voluntary documentation. Nobody's using the word investigation yet, but, such a small word carrying such enormous weight. Emergency all hands meeting in 20 minutes, Jamie continued. They're saying it's about Q4 targets, but I saw the agenda on someone's screen. It's damage control. I closed the chat and deleted the app. Jamie was smart enough to do the same. By noon, the whispers had started spreading through the industry LinkedIn network. Anyone know what's happening at Nexacor? Heard they're bringing in crisis management consultants. My friend there says they've frozen all vendor contracts. I pulled up the SEC's Edgar database, watching for any emergency filings. Nothing yet. But the absence of noise was itself a kind of noise. Nexacor's usual Thursday investor update was conspicuously absent. At 2:15 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. But I recognized the area code. Nexacor's headquarters. Sophia. Marcus's voice, stripped of its usual salad-eating smugness. We need to talk. I'm sorry. Who is this? I asked, admiring my manicure. Don't play games. I know it was you at that hearing. I have no idea what you're talking about, Marcus. As I recall, I don't work for Nexacor anymore. Cultural restructuring. Remember? A pause. I could hear him breathing, that stressed half-pant he did when quarterly numbers disappointed. What do you want? He asked. Want? I'm unemployed, Marcus. I want a job. But apparently, I wasn't a good cultural fit for your optimized human capital allocation. This isn't funny. No. I agreed. It's not. Neither was 10 years of ignored warnings. Neither was being escorted out by security like I'd stolen staplers instead of saved your ass from regulatory disasters. The SEC is asking questions. The SEC asks lots of questions. It's literally their job. Sophia, you know what's interesting about public hearings? I interrupted. They're public. Anyone can attend. Anyone can ask questions. Even unemployed former compliance officers with time on their hands and expertise to share. You documented everything, didn't you? His voice had dropped to nearly a whisper. All those emails you sent to yourself. Company policy encouraged maintaining proper documentation. I've always been a stickler for following policy. You found that annoying, as I recall. Another pause. In the background, I could hear voices, urgent and overlapping. The war room was in session. The board wants to know what it would take to make this go away, he said finally. I laughed. Actually laughed. Make it go away? Marcus, I didn't make anything happen. I asked a hypothetical question at a public hearing. If that question happens to resemble your actual business practices, well, that's quite a coincidence, isn't it? You know what I mean. No, I don't. Because that would sound like you're trying to buy my silence about potential regulatory violations. And that would be witness tampering, wouldn't it? And we both know Nexicor would never engage in such behavior. After all, integrity is one of your core values. It's etched in crystal. The line went dead. By 4 p.m., the first news story broke. SEC investigating fintech firm over vendor compliance questions. No company named yet, but the details were specific enough. 47 vendors. Third-party payment processing. Identity verification services. My phone buzzed again. Jamie. They're shredding documents. Is that legal? Destroying documents after receiving an SEC inquiry? I typed. No. Very much? No. Should I report it? Follow your conscience, and maybe update your resume. The local news picked it up by 6 p.m. By 8 p.m., it was on financial Twitter. By 10 p.m., someone had leaked that it was Nexicor, and their after-hours stock price dropped 12%. I made myself a proper dinner for the first time in weeks. Salmon, asparagus, a nice Pinot Grigio. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, while my phone lit up with notifications I didn't check. The dominoes were falling now, each one hitting the next with inevitable precision. The SEC inquiry would trigger an audit, the audit would find the violations would trigger fines, the fines would trigger shareholder lawsuits, the lawsuits would trigger board resignations. And all because Marcus couldn't spare $3 million for compliance. He'd probably spend 10 times that on lawyers now, trying to contain what couldn't be contained. I raised my glass to my empty apartment, to the ghost of my corporate career, to the beautiful mathematics of consequence. To velocity, I toasted, and to finding out what happens when you hit a wall at full speed. Outside my window, the city lights twinkled like 47 small fires, each one burning a hole in Nexicor's future. The best part? I hadn't even played my strongest cards yet. Saturday morning, I discovered I was richer than I'd thought. The email from Fidelity had been sitting in my inbox for 3 days, lost in the chaos of everything else. Your Nexicor Systems employee stock options, vesting confirmation. I'd forgotten about the equity. When you're focused on survival, on paying rent and keeping health insurance, stock options feel like monopoly money, colorful, official-looking, but ultimately meaningless. Until they're not. 0.2% of the company. That's what I'd accumulated over 10 years, vesting quarter by quarter. A breadcrumb trail of theoretical wealth I'd never bothered to calculate. At Nexicor's current valuation, or rather, its valuation before this week's 12% drop, that was worth approximately $1.4 million. But here's the beautiful thing about vested options. They're mine. Fully exercised, sitting in my brokerage account, no longer tied to employment status. They'd been so eager to push me out the door, they'd forgotten to check what I was carrying with me. I pulled up the shareholders' agreement, the dense legal document I'd signed years ago when stock options felt like lottery tickets. Page 47, Section 8.3. In the event of regulatory investigation or material adverse events, shareholders maintaining greater than 0.1% ownership may request full documentation of company financial records. Greater than 0.1%, I had double that. The timing was critical. Nexicor's stock had dropped 12% on rumors alone. When the SEC investigation became official, when the fines were announced, it would crater. But right now, in this moment of uncertainty, I held $1.4 million in rapidly depreciating assets and the legal right to demand every document that could prove my warnings had been ignored. I called my lawyer. Not the strip mall divorce attorney who'd handled my apartment lease, but Sandra Morrison, the securities litigation specialist who'd given me her card at a conference 3 years ago. "Call me if you ever need someone who speaks both compliance and combat," she'd said. "Sandra, it's Sophia Grant. You might have seen the news about Nexicor. I've been wondering when you'd call." Her voice was crisp, alert, despite it being Saturday. "I assume you're not calling to chat about the weather. I have 0.2% equity and 10 years of documented warnings they ignored. How much damage can I do?" She actually laughed. "How much damage do you want to do?" "I want them to understand that some things cost more than $3 million in compliance upgrades. Send me everything. And Sophia? Don't sell those shares yet. As a shareholder, you have standing for a derivative suit. The board breached its fiduciary duty by ignoring your warnings. That's a different kind of expensive." By Monday, I'd formally requested documentation as a shareholder. By Tuesday, Nexicor's legal team was in full panic mode. They couldn't refuse. The shareholders' agreement was ironclad, but they also couldn't comply without handing me evidence of their negligence. Wednesday brought another call from Marcus. "The board is prepared to buy back your shares," he said without preamble. "Market price plus 50%. Market price from when? Today? Or before your negligence tanked the value?" "That's negotiable." "No. Marcus, it's not. Because I'm not selling. These shares are my ticket to the shareholders' meeting next month. You remember those, right? Where shareholders get to ask questions in front of the board and the press. What do you want?" He sounded exhausted. "I wanted you to listen. 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 months ago. But that ship has sailed, hasn't it? The company could go under. Companies don't go under from following regulations, Marcus. They go under from ignoring them. You destroy hundreds of jobs to prove a point. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just a shareholder exercising my legal rights. If that destroys the company, maybe the company was built on sand." Thursday's financial news. Nexicor faces shareholder revolt as investigation deepens. My name wasn't mentioned, but the article noted that a significant shareholder with insider knowledge was demanding documentation. By Friday, 3 institutional investors had joined my request. If 0.2% could cause this much trouble, imagine what the pension funds and mutual funds were thinking. The board called an emergency meeting. I sat in my apartment, watching the stock price tick down on my laptop. Each point was thousands of dollars evaporating from my net worth. But each point was also millions disappearing from Marcus's portfolio, from the board members' holdings, from the executives who'd sat in that conference room and decided I was expendable. My phone rang. Not Marcus this time. Richard Brennan, chairman of the board. "Ms. Grant, I believe we've been undervaluing your expertise. Past tense seems appropriate. Mr. Brennan, the board would like to discuss a consulting arrangement to help navigate the current regulatory environment." I almost admired the audacity. Fire me to save money, then hire me back as a consultant at 3 times the rate to fix the mess they'd created by firing me. "My consulting rate is $5,000 per day," I said, "plus full reinstatement of my benefits and a written acknowledgement that my termination was without cause. That's substantial. So are SEC fines, so are shareholder lawsuits. So is the cost of ignoring a decade of warnings from your compliance officer." Silence. Then, "I'll take it to the board." As I hung up, I realized I didn't care what they decided. Either they'd pay me a fortune to fix their mistakes, or they'd let the company burn while I held 2% of the ashes and the legal standing to sue them for the difference. Sometimes the smallest percentages carry the biggest weight, like a crack in a dam. Insignificant until the pressure builds. And the pressure was definitely building. Tuesday morning, the dam broke. SEC halts trading of Nexicor Systems pending investigation. The headline appeared on Bloomberg at 9:31 a.m., 1 minute after market open, trading suspended, the corporate equivalent of cardiac arrest. My phone exploded with notifications. Former colleagues, reporters, headhunters smelling blood in the water. I ignored them all, focusing instead on my laptop screen where Nexacor's last traded price hung frozen, $47.82, down 34% from when they'd shown me the door. The Wall Street Journal had the story by 10 a.m. Fintech firm faces multiple violations in vendor compliance scandal. They'd done their homework. 47 vendors named. Potential fines calculated. A helpful sidebar explaining how ignoring internal warnings could constitute criminal negligence. But the real gift came at noon. A leaked internal memo from Marcus to all staff. Team, I want to address the rumors circulating about our regulatory situation. While we take these matters seriously, I'm confident that our practices have always been within industry standards. Any suggestion that we knowingly ignored compliance issues is categorically false. Categorically false. I pulled up an email from 18 months ago, Marcus's digital signature at the bottom. Sophia, kill the vendor audit project. It's a waste of resources. If the SEC hasn't noticed by now, they never will. Sandra, my lawyer, called at 2 p.m. They're in freefall. 3 board members resigned this morning. The CFO is taking a leave of absence. And get this, Marcus just hired criminal defense counsel. Criminal? Destroying documents after an SEC inquiry, someone reported it. Wasn't you? Was it? I've been unemployed, Sandra, spending my time at coffee shops and public hearings. Very relaxing. She laughed. Well, someone inside is talking. The FBI's involved now. The FBI? I hadn't expected that particular gift, but I'd take it. By 3 p.m., CNBC had picked up the story. They'd found my question from the public hearing, even had video. Unknown questioner triggers massive investigation into Nexacor systems. My face was blurry, my name unmentioned. But anyone who knew me would recognize the navy suit, the posture, the precise way I'd framed that deadly question. At 4 p.m., an unexpected email arrived. From Jamie. Younga Proton Mail. Com. You should know they're trying to pin this on you. Saying you planted evidence before you left. Saying you sabotaged vendor relationships. Marcus is telling everyone you were fired for incompetence and this is revenge. But some of us know better. Some of us kept copies too. Some of us remember every warning you gave that they ignored. Check the news tomorrow. Tomorrow. I marked my calendar with a simple note. Popcorn. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in 10 years. I relaxed. Really relaxed. Opened a bottle of wine that cost more than my old hourly rate. Ordered sushi from the place that doesn't deliver unless you know the owner's personal number. Put on music that had nothing to do with productivity or motivation. My portfolio app showed my Nexacor shares now valued at $431,000. A paper loss of nearly $1 million from their peak. But paper losses were just that. Paper. The real loss was Nexacor's market cap evaporated by $2 billion. Credit rating downgraded. Acquisition talks that had been rumored for months suddenly, definitively dead. At 9 p.m., another call from Richard Brennan. The board has reconsidered your consulting offer, he said, his voice stripped of its usual chairman authority. It's no longer available, I replied. I'm sorry? That offer expired when trading was halted. My new rate is $10,000 per day. Minimum 6-month contract. Paid up front. That's $1.8 million. Still less than your SEC fines will be. Significantly less than the shareholder lawsuits. And infinitely less than federal criminal penalties. You planned this. It wasn't a question. I planned nothing. Richard, I warned. For 10 years, I warned. You planned to ignore me. How's that plan working out? He hung up without another word. At 11 p.m., I performed one final task. I logged into my brokerage account and placed a limit order to sell all my Nexacor shares at $5 per share, roughly 10% of their current frozen value. A lowball offer that would only execute if the stock completely cratered when trading resumed. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the message. I'd rather take 10 cents on the dollar than remain associated with what Nexacor had become. Or perhaps, what it had always been, a house of cards built on the assumption that rules were for other people. The financial press would call it a massacre. The SEC would call it a victory for enforcement. The FBI would call it evidence of systemic corruption. I called it inevitable. As midnight approached, I stood at my window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably on his third conference call with lawyers, trying to spin a story that would keep him out of prison. The board was probably calculating how many executives they'd need to sacrifice to appease regulators. The employees were probably updating their resumes, wondering if their equity was worth anything at all. And me? I was planning my next move. Because when trading resumed, when the dust settled, when the investigations concluded and the fines were paid and the executives were sentenced, there would be opportunities, distressed assets to acquire, competitors needing compliance expertise, startups wanting to avoid Nexacor's fate. They'd fired me to save $3 million. Tomorrow, they'd learn what that savings actually cost. The package arrived on a Thursday, 6 weeks after trading resumed. No return address, just premium stationery and the Nexacor logo, or what was left of it after the acquisition. Inside, a single sheet of paper and a sticky note in Marcus's handwriting. You were right. The paper was a printout of the final SEC settlement, $47 million in fines, $1 million per vendor. Exactly as I'd calculated in that public hearing. Below it, the criminal indictments. Marcus Bell, obstruction of justice. 2 board members, securities fraud. The CFO, who'd taken that convenient leave of absence, conspiracy to deceive regulators. I didn't need the confirmation. I'd watched it all unfold from my new office. Yes, office. Turns out, when you're the person who publicly predicted a massive compliance failure, other companies suddenly find your expertise invaluable. My consulting firm, Grant Compliance Solutions, had more clients than I could handle. All of them terrified of becoming the next Nexacor, but I kept that paper anyway. Framed it, actually. Hung it right next to my business license and my favorite quote. The truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Let it loose. It will defend itself. The acquisition news had broken 2 weeks prior. A competitor bought Nexacor's assets for pennies on the dollar. The technology, the client list, the infrastructure, everything except the liabilities and the people. Most of them were gone, scattered to the wind like my belongings had been scattered into that cardboard box. My shares had sold at $4.73, just below my limit order. The check for $42,000 felt like a lottery ticket, money I'd never expected from equity I'd written off. I donated half to a whistleblower protection fund and used the rest to buy a really exceptional bottle of champagne. But the real conclusion came in an unexpected form. An email from Jamie, now working at a startup that actually valued compliance. Saw the news about Marcus's sentencing, 18 months minimum security. Thought you should know, before everything went down. He had a meeting where he said firing you would save the company money. Someone asked what if you talked. He said, what's she going to do? She's nobody. Just another disgruntled ex-employee. Guess he knows better now. Nobody. Just another disgruntled ex-employee. I pulled out my finest stationery, the kind that feels like money between your fingers. In careful handwriting, I composed a note. Marcus, thank you for the employment opportunity. While our professional relationship ended earlier than expected, I found the experience educational. I trust your current situation is providing similar learning opportunities. As you once told me, compliance is just paper threats. I hope you're finding comfort in all that paper now. Best wishes for your cultural restructuring. Nobody. I addressed it to the Federal Correctional Institution where he'd be spending the next year and a half. No return address. He'd know who it was from. The afternoon sun slanted through my office windows, casting long shadows across the success I'd built from their failure. My assistant knocked, I had an assistant now, reminding me about my 3 p.m. meeting with a Fortune 500 company desperate to avoid Nexacor's fate. Tell them I'll be right there, I said, sealing the envelope, Some might call what happened revenge. But revenge implies anger, passion, the heat of emotion driving action. This hadn't been that. This had been mathematics, simple cause and effect. They'd removed a variable from their equation without understanding its value. The result was inevitable. I dropped the letter in the outgoing mail and straightened my jacket. A new one, designer. The kind I'd never have splurged on when I was trying to fit into their culture. Now I didn't need to fit in anywhere. I was the culture companies wanted to build. The speaking circuit called it the Nexacore case study. Business schools taught it as a cautionary tale. The SEC used it in training materials, and somewhere in a federal facility. Marcus Bell had 18 months to think about the cost of saving $3 million. Me. I had a business to run, clients to protect, and the satisfying knowledge that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe's accounting department comes to collect. They'd fired me with a cardboard box and 2 weeks severance. I'd returned fire with something far more devastating, the truth. And the truth, as it turns out, was worth significantly more than $3 million. The letter would reach Marcus in 3 to 5 business days. The same amount of time it had taken them to erase me from their system, symmetry, balance, justice. I walked into my next meeting, ready to save another company from itself. Because that's what I did now. I saved companies from their own Marcus Bells, their own willful blindness, their own expensive assumptions that rules were for other people. The woman who'd been nobody had become everybody's last hope, and business was very, very good. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below, and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of corporate justice, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Sophia's position? Let me know in the comments.